The rancher offered his Apache neighbor shelter. The next day she asked, "Is your offer still good?" On the dusty roads that wound between the ranches, the air was quiet, except for the occasional sound of a hawk calling overhead or the soft rustle of the wind through dry grass. At his ranch, the rancher worked steadily, tending to the few cows that grazed on the sparse pasture. He had always lived this way, early mornings, long days, and nights filled with the silence of his own thoughts. Life had taught him to rely on himself, and in return, he had grown strong, capable, and cautious. Yet beneath the rough exterior and calloused hands, there was a heart that quietly cared for others, even if he rarely showed it. Across the narrow valley, his neighbor lived alone on a smaller piece of land. She was an Apache woman, proud and independent, who had endured hardships that most people could not imagine. Her house was modest, barely more than a wooden structure, but it was home. She had survived storms, broken fences, and the judgment of neighbors who often misunderstood her. The rancher had known her from afar for years, noticing her work ethic, her quiet strength, and the way she always faced her challenges head-on. They were neighbors in proximity but distant in interaction, each respecting the other's privacy. On that particular evening, the rancher noticed something unusual. He had been repairing a fence that had started leaning under the weight of the season's storms when his eyes caught a movement near her property. She was outside, carrying a bucket of water and several supplies. The way she moved suggested struggle. She was tired, perhaps overwhelmed. The rancher felt a pull in his chest, an instinct that told him she needed help. He paused in his work and watched for a moment, unsure of whether he should speak up. He knew she valued her independence and that offering help could be delicate, but he also knew that sometimes, waiting too long could make a situation worse. He decided to approach. Walking slowly, he crossed the short distance to her property, careful not to startle her. When she saw him coming, her eyes narrowed slightly, a mixture of caution and curiosity. She had learned over the years to guard herself against offers that came too easily. He stopped a respectful distance away, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "Evening," he said. "I noticed you've been working hard today. If you need a place to rest, even for a night, my doors are open." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. She did not answer immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft whisper of the wind and the distant call of an owl beginning its night patrol. In that silence, the rancher wondered if he had overstepped or if he had simply said the right thing. He did not push further, knowing that trust could not be forced. She turned her gaze away for a moment, then back at him, still quiet but not dismissive. He gave her a small nod as if to say he would respect her choice, whatever it might be. Then he turned and began walking back to his property, leaving the offer in the air, like a seed waiting to be planted. As he returned, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The rancher had always lived by his own rules, valuing independence and self-reliance. But seeing her struggle reminded him that everyone, no matter how strong, sometimes needed a hand. He reflected on his own life, how often he had turned down help out of pride, and how lonely it had made some of his nights. Perhaps this was his chance to do something different, to act with kindness without expectation. The thought stayed with him as he finished repairing the fence, his hands sore but his mind alert with concern for his neighbor. Meanwhile, she returned to her modest home, carrying the supplies inside with quiet deliberation. Her mind raced with questions and doubts. She had always managed on her own, facing the challenges of life with determination and resilience. Accepting help had never been easy for her. It felt like admitting weakness, and she had spent a lifetime proving she was not weak. Yet, as she set down the last of the supplies and looked out her small window toward the rancher's property, she felt a strange warmth, a sense that someone truly saw her struggle and cared enough to offer assistance without judgment. She did not speak aloud, but a quiet thought formed. maybe, just maybe, it would not hurt to consider his offer. That night, as the sun finally disappeared and the sky turned deep indigo, the rancher sat alone on his porch. The air was cool and the stars began to peek through, distant and silent witnesses to the small drama unfolding below. He thought about her, the way she had carried herself, the pride that was visible even in exhaustion. He admired her strength, but he also knew the quiet vulnerability that comes with being human. He wondered if she would take him up on his offer or if she would continue to carry her burdens alone. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the aroma filling the small space of his kitchen. Sitting down, he reflected on the power of a simple act of kindness. Offering shelter was not a grand gesture, not a heroic deed, but it carried a weight that could change lives. He thought about the challenges they both faced, the harsh weather, the long days, the loneliness that often crept in at night. In a way, this small offer could be a bridge, connecting two lives in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. Across the valley, she lay awake on a modest bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was restless, turning over the events of the day. She thought about her past struggles, the battles she had fought silently, and the nights she had endured alone. Accepting help was foreign to her, yet the rancher's offer lingered in her thoughts, not as a burden, but as a possibility. She felt a glimmer of hope, a rare spark that perhaps she did not have to face everything entirely on her own. For the first time in a long while, she considered what it might feel like to have a safe place to rest, even for just a night. The rancher, meanwhile, found himself unable to sleep. His mind wandered to the moments of hesitation he had seen in her expression, the careful consideration before she had turned away. He respected her choice, but he could not ignore the quiet urgency he felt, an urge to help, to act, to be present. He realized that sometimes kindness requires patience, and sometimes it is enough to simply offer, even if the other person takes time to respond. As the night deepened, both of them lay in separate beds, under the same wide sky, connected by an unspoken understanding. One had offered help, the other had silently considered it. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but both felt the stirrings of something significant, a change that could reshape their lives if only they allowed it. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the hills in soft gold, the rancher had already risen. He moved through his morning routine with deliberate care, tending to his livestock and preparing for the day ahead, all the while thinking of his neighbor. He did not know if she would accept the offer, but he felt a quiet certainty that sometimes the right thing is simply to extend a hand. And in the distance, he caught sight of her silhouette through the trees, and for a brief moment, he saw not just a neighbor, but a person who had endured so much, standing quietly and facing the world with courage. It was a simple beginning, almost unremarkable in its quietness, but it held the promise of change. In a world often defined by hardship, small gestures like this could ripple outward in ways neither of them could yet imagine. And so the day began, with the rancher tending his land, the woman carrying her burdens, and both of them unknowingly preparing for a story of trust, courage, and human connection that was only just beginning. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the hills, spilling golden light across the dusty roads and fields. Birds began their morning chorus, and the wind carried the faint scent of wild grass and earth. The rancher had already been awake for hours, as was his habit, checking on the livestock, feeding the animals, and inspecting the fences he had repaired the previous day. He moved with quiet purpose, every action deliberate, every step measured. Yet even in the rhythm of his work, his thoughts kept returning to the Apache woman who lived nearby. She had not responded to his offer the previous evening, and the rancher had respected her silence. But deep down, he hoped that she might reconsider. He did not feel entitled to her trust or gratitude. He simply knew that the world could be cruel, that storms could come, both literal and figurative, and sometimes a small act of shelter could make a difference. He wondered if she had slept well, if she had worried through the night, or if she had decided she could manage another day on her own. As he rounded the corner near the barn, he noticed movement along the edge of the property. At first he thought it might be one of the animals wandering too close to the fence, but then he saw her. She was standing near the gate, her small frame silhouetted against the morning light, carrying nothing more than a single satchel. Her hair was slightly disheveled from the night, and the tiredness in her eyes betrayed the weight she carried daily. She looked directly at him, her expression calm but carrying a quiet determination. "Good morning," the rancher said, keeping his voice even, careful not to startle her. "Did you sleep well?" She took a slow breath, then asked, softly but with clarity, "Is your offer still good?" The rancher felt a mix of relief and surprise. Her words were simple, yet they carried a depth of meaning that went beyond a mere yes or no. She had come of her own choice, after thinking through her doubts, after weighing pride against practicality. He nodded, stepping aside to allow her through the gate. "Yes," he said simply, "the offer is still good." She hesitated for a moment at the threshold, studying the rancher with eyes that seemed to take in everything. The fences, the open pastures, the way he moved, the calmness that seemed to fill the space around him. Then, with a small nod, she stepped onto the property. Her steps were cautious but deliberate, each one carrying the weight of someone used to making careful decisions. Once inside, she looked around, taking in the barn, the small house, and the open fields beyond. The rancher noticed her attention to detail, the way her eyes lingered on the fences, the tools, the animals. She noticed the care in which he tended to everything, the pride in his land, and the quiet discipline that governed his life. Without a word, there was a silent understanding between them. Both respected diligence, both valued effort, and both understood the unspoken rules of life on the land. For the first day, their interaction was careful and measured. The rancher offered her a simple breakfast, eggs, toast, and coffee, prepared with the same deliberate care he applied to everything. She accepted, sitting quietly at the small wooden table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She ate slowly, savoring the food and the calm of the moment. Conversation was minimal, but even the small exchanges carried meaning. The rancher learned a little about her past, enough to understand her strength and resilience, while she observed him, noticing how he moved, how he spoke, and how he treated the land and animals around him. As the morning progressed, they began to work side by side. She helped with chores, feeding the animals, gathering firewood, checking fences, moving naturally, with a quiet confidence that impressed the rancher. He noticed her attention to detail, her careful hands, the way she carried herself as someone used to managing alone. At the same time, he showed her the routines of his land, explaining why certain fences needed repair, why some areas required more water, and how to handle the livestock safely. She listened attentively, asking questions when necessary, not out of ignorance, but out of a desire to understand and learn. The hours passed with a rhythm that was almost meditative. The work was hard, the sun climbing higher, casting warmth and light across the land. Yet in the shared effort, a bond began to form, one built on mutual respect and quiet understanding. Neither needed to speak much. Actions and small gestures spoke louder than words. The rancher respected her independence and allowed her space, while she respected his authority on the land, following his guidance without losing her sense of self. By midday, they took a break under the shade of an old oak tree near the barn. The wind carried the scent of hay and earth, and the sounds of animals created a gentle background music. The rancher poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Here," he said, "drink. You'll need it." She accepted the cup with a nod and a small smile, the first sign of warmth she had shown since arriving. "Thank you," she said softly. There was no hesitation, no pride blocking the words, just a simple expression of gratitude, honest and unguarded. After a moment of silence, she asked a question, hesitant but curious. Why did you offer?" The rancher paused, considering his answer. He could have given a simple explanation, but he chose honesty. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "Because sometimes people need a place to rest, and because everyone deserves a little help now and then." She studied him, her eyes searching for something deeper, some hidden motive. Finding none, she nodded slowly, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. Trust was not immediate, but it was beginning to grow, built on small truths and shared effort rather than words alone. The afternoon continued with more chores, mending fences, repairing a gate and checking the water troughs. They worked in comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional words of guidance or questions about a task. Each gesture was respectful, each action mindful. The rancher noticed how naturally she adapted to the routines, how she handled each task with care, and how her presence added a subtle energy to the land that had felt empty in recent days. As evening approached, the rancher prepared a simple meal, allowing her to settle into the small guest room he had readied. She unpacked a few belongings, keeping them neatly arranged, as though respecting the space she now temporarily occupied. She looked out the small window at the sprawling land beyond, taking in the sight of the sun setting over the hills. The moment was quiet, almost sacred, and it was clear that she felt the weight of her decision, the choice to accept help, to step into someone else's world, even for a brief time. Dinner was modest but filling, roast chicken, vegetables, and freshly baked bread. They ate at the table, the light from the kitchen casting soft shadows across the room. Conversation was slow, careful, and respectful. She spoke of her daily routines and her challenges, and he shared some of his own experiences growing up on the ranch. There was laughter, quiet but genuine, a rare sound in their otherwise disciplined and serious lives. After the meal, the rancher offered her a tour of the property. They walked through the fields, checking the fences and inspecting the livestock. He explained the importance of certain routines, why some areas required special attention, and how the seasons affected their work. She listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, demonstrating her intelligence and keen understanding of the land. The rancher could not help but admire her, not just for her strength but for her humility, her willingness to learn, and the quiet courage that had brought her here. As the day drew to a close, they returned to the house. The sky was painted in deep purples and blues, stars beginning to twinkle in the night. They stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the world transition from day to night. Neither spoke, but both felt the unspoken bond that had formed, a connection built not on words or promises, but on shared effort, mutual respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's humanity. The rancher returned to his own room, reflecting on the day. He realized that offering shelter had been more than a simple act of kindness. It had been a test of patience, understanding, and trust. The woman had accepted, not out of desperation alone, but because she had recognized the sincerity behind his offer. And in doing so, she had shown him that true strength often comes with humility, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. Meanwhile, she lay in the guest room, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. She had accepted help, something she rarely did, and the experience was both comforting and strange. She thought about her past struggles, the nights she had endured alone, and the barriers she had built to protect herself. Now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of possibility, a chance to rest, to be safe, and perhaps to trust again. She did not yet know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she allowed herself to feel a small measure of peace. Outside, the rancher checked the locks, ensuring that everything was secure. He walked back to the porch, looking out at the wide-open land, the animals settling in for the night, and the stars above. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that a small step had been taken toward something meaningful. Life on the ranch was rarely easy, but in that moment, he felt the quiet reassurance that sometimes the right action, no matter how small, could make a difference. And so, the first night under the same sky ended with two people, strangers in some ways, beginning to understand each other. One had offered shelter, the other had accepted it. Both were cautious, aware of the fragile balance between independence and trust. Yet in the simple acts of kindness, attention, and shared effort, a story was unfolding. A story of courage, respect, and the human capacity to connect, even when life had made connection difficult. The following morning, the sun rose bright and warm, casting long shadows across the ranch. The rancher was already awake, moving through his usual routine, but today there was a different feeling in the air. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The woman had stayed the night, and her presence was now a part of the ranch, like a quiet breeze that gently shifts the dust on the paths and rustles the leaves in the trees. There was a sense of curiosity and caution in her movements as she emerged from the guest room, carrying herself with the quiet strength that had always defined her. She paused for a moment on the porch, taking in the view of the fields and the distant hills. Everything seemed brighter, sharper, and yet it also felt heavier, filled with the weight of responsibility and the unknown. She had accepted the rancher's offer, but now the reality of it settled on her. She was stepping into a world that was not hers, following the guidance of someone she barely knew. And yet, there was something in the way the rancher had acted, the quiet dignity and patience he had shown, that made her feel safe enough to trust, if only a little. The rancher greeted her with a nod, careful not to overwhelm her. "Morning," he said simply. "Coffee's ready if you want some." She nodded in return, moving toward the small kitchen, her footsteps deliberate but unhurried. She had learned over the years to observe before acting, to measure her surroundings, and to be prepared for any situation. This was no different, though the stakes felt higher. She did not know how long she would stay, how much she could rely on this new environment, or what challenges might arise in the days to come. Breakfast was quiet, the clinking of utensils and the soft murmur of conversation filling the small kitchen. They spoke in measured tones, sharing information about the day ahead, the animals that needed tending and the chores that awaited. There was no small talk, no unnecessary words. Each sentence carried weight and purpose. It was a rhythm that suited them both, a balance between respect and practicality. After breakfast, they moved outside to begin the day's work. The rancher showed her how to check the fences for weak spots, how to handle the livestock safely, and how to identify areas of the land that needed attention. She followed closely, asking questions when necessary, demonstrating not ignorance, but an eagerness to understand and learn. Her hands were steady, her movements precise, and it was clear that she was not unfamiliar with hard work. The rancher noticed her skill and determination, realizing that she was more capable than many people he had worked with over the years. As they worked together, they began to talk more about their lives, though carefully. She spoke of her struggles, the challenges she had faced living alone, and the ways she had learned to survive. He listened, offering small pieces of advice when appropriate, but mostly allowing her to speak, recognizing that she needed to be heard without judgment. He shared stories from his own life, not as lessons but as experiences, moments that shaped who he was and how he understood the world. The day passed with a quiet intensity. Every task, every movement, every glance carried meaning. The rancher admired her strength, her independence, and her ability to face difficulties without complaint. She admired his consistency, his fairness, and the way he treated the land and animals with care. There was a mutual respect growing between them, a silent acknowledgement that each recognized the other's value and worth. Around midday, they paused under the shade of a large tree near the barn. The air was warm, filled with the scent of grass and earth. The rancher handed her a cup of water and she drank slowly, savoring the cool relief it provided. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, listening to the world around them. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the quiet murmurs of the livestock. It was a moment of calm, a pause in the ongoing rhythm of life that allowed them to breathe and reflect. "You've done a lot today," the rancher said finally, breaking the silence. "I don't say it often, but I notice when someone works hard and does it right. You've got skill and I respect that." She looked at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Thank you," she said. "I've had to be careful my whole life. I've learned to do what's necessary." Her tone was steady, but there was a hint of vulnerability beneath the surface, a recognition that she could rely on someone else, at least temporarily, without losing herself. The rancher nodded, understanding that trust was fragile and had to be earned, not demanded. "That's true," he said, "and it's why I offered you a place here. Not to change who you are, but to give you a chance to rest and to know someone has your back, even if just for a little while." She absorbed his words, letting them settle in her mind. It was not easy for her to accept help, to allow someone into her life in any meaningful way. But there was something in the rancher's demeanor, in the way he spoke and acted, that made her believe he meant what he said. It was rare to encounter such sincerity, and she found herself appreciating it more than she expected. After the break, they returned to work. The rancher began teaching her how to repair sections of the fence that were damaged beyond simple fixes. She learned quickly, her hands steady and her mind focused. There was a rhythm to the work, a flow that required cooperation, attention, and care. As they worked side by side, their movements began to sync naturally, each understanding the other's pace and method without the need for constant instruction. By the late afternoon, the rancher noticed her beginning to tire. "Take a moment," he said, gesturing toward the shade. "You've been at this all morning and early afternoon. Resting is part of the work too." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, accepting his offer. They sat together under the tree, sipping water and enjoying the quiet of the land. There was a sense of comfort in the shared silence, a recognition that they were no longer entirely strangers. For the first time, she felt the possibility of belonging somewhere, even if temporarily. As the sun began to descend behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, the rancher suggested they check on the livestock one last time before dinner. The woman followed, moving with a quiet confidence that had grown through the day. She handled the animals with care, demonstrating a natural understanding of their needs. The rancher watched, impressed by her skill and the patience she exhibited. It was clear that she had faced challenges in her life that had taught her resilience, resourcefulness, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. After the final check, they returned to the house. The woman settled into the guest room while the rancher prepared a simple dinner. The aroma of cooked vegetables, fresh bread, and roasted meat filled the small kitchen. When dinner was ready, they ate together, sharing stories and small laughs, each moment building a bridge of trust and understanding between them. As the evening progressed, the rancher offered to show her some of the land under the starlit sky. They walked slowly along the paths, stopping occasionally to observe the fields and the livestock resting for the night. The quiet was comforting, the night sky vast and full of stars, and it created a sense of peace neither had expected to find. "You have a beautiful place," she said quietly. "I can see why you've worked so hard here." He smiled faintly, appreciating her words. "It's been my life's work," he said, "but it's more than just the land. It's about respect, respect for the animals, the earth, and the people who walk here, and I can tell you already you understand that too." She looked at him, surprised by his insight. "I try," she said softly. "I've had to learn quickly to survive." "That you have," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "And you've done well. You've shown strength today, not just in your work but in trusting and allowing yourself to be here." The words struck her not as flattery but as acknowledgement. It was rare for someone to recognize her efforts and struggles without judgment. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel seen, to feel that her life and experiences mattered, even in this small, quiet corner of the world. As the night deepened, they returned to the house. The woman prepared for bed, her movements calm but thoughtful. She reflected on the day, the work, the quiet conversations, the moments of shared understanding. It had been exhausting, yes, but also strangely comforting. She had faced many challenges in her life alone, yet here she felt a glimmer of safety, a small but meaningful sense of connection. The rancher, meanwhile, sat on the porch after finishing his own chores. He looked out at the land, the fields bathed in moonlight, the animals resting peacefully, and he felt a sense of satisfaction. The woman had accepted his offer, but more than that, she had shown that she was willing to trust him, to step into a situation that was unfamiliar and uncertain. It was a rare and meaningful step, and he knew that trust like this must be handled with care. In the quiet of the night, both of them lay awake, thinking about the day that had passed. She thought about the kindness he had shown, the patience and the respect. He thought about her resilience, the quiet strength, and the willingness to accept help without losing herself. They were two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstance, choice, and a simple act of compassion. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: their lives had begun to intersect in a way that would change both of them. What had started as a simple offer of shelter had become a day of understanding, respect, and connection. A day that neither would forget, and a foundation for what was yet to come. The next morning, the rancher woke to the sound of birds chirping and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. There was a calmness to the ranch, but he noticed something in the air that made him pause, a tension, subtle but present, as if the day would not pass as quietly as the last. He had grown used to the routine, to the rhythm of caring for the land and livestock. But he also knew that life rarely stayed peaceful for long, especially when others were involved. The woman had already risen, moving quietly through the small kitchen where she had prepared her own breakfast. She had grown accustomed to the routines of the ranch, but today she seemed more alert, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting something. The rancher noticed it immediately, the cautious posture, the readiness in her movements. He understood all too well that when someone has faced a lifetime of challenges, they rarely relax completely, even in safe spaces. They ate together in silence, the clinking of utensils and the aroma of breakfast filling the room. The rancher watched her closely, noticing the tension in her shoulders and the careful way she moved. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently, though he already suspected the answer. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm fine," she said softly. "It's just I have to be careful." Her voice carried both strength and vulnerability, a reminder of the life she had endured. The rancher understood immediately. Trust was not something given easily, and even in a place of safety, past experiences lingered. After breakfast, they began their work as usual, repairing a section of the fence that had suffered from recent storms. The rancher guided her carefully, explaining each step while she followed diligently, her hands steady and precise. Yet, despite the routine, the air seemed charged with an unspoken awareness. Both of them knew that the peace they had enjoyed the previous days could be fragile, and that outside forces might soon make themselves known. By late morning, a vehicle approached from the distant road, dust rising in a thin cloud behind it. The rancher's gaze followed the movement, and he tensed slightly. Visitors were rare, and unexpected ones could bring trouble, especially for someone in the woman's situation. As the vehicle came closer, it became clear that it was not just a casual visitor. Rumors had circulated in the small communities nearby, and sometimes judgment and suspicion traveled faster than truth. The woman noticed the vehicle as well, her hand instinctively tightening around a small tool she carried. "Do you know them?" she asked quietly, her voice low but alert. The rancher shook his head. "No, but we'll see." He stepped forward to greet the visitors, his posture calm but firm. When they arrived, it became apparent that they were curious neighbors, people who had heard of her presence at the ranch and were now questioning the circumstances. Their expressions ranged from mild curiosity to subtle disapproval, a reminder that outside pressures could affect even the quietest lives. The rancher addressed them politely but firmly. "She is my guest," he said. "She has my permission to be here. I expect everyone to respect that." His words carried authority but also a sense of fairness. He did not raise his voice, did not allow anger to dictate his actions. He simply stated the truth, standing firm in his decision to protect her. The neighbors hesitated, unsure how to respond. The woman, standing behind the rancher, felt a mix of relief and appreciation. She had known that accepting his offer meant exposing herself to scrutiny, but she had not realized the extent to which others might judge or question her. Seeing the rancher defend her so quietly and effectively gave her a sense of security she had not felt in years. Once the visitors departed, the rancher turned to her. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuinely concerned. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "Thank you for standing up for me. I didn't expect anyone to care enough to do that." Her voice was quiet but sincere, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel a measure of gratitude without the usual hesitation. The day continued with their routine, though a subtle awareness lingered in the air. Both were more cautious now, aware that the world beyond the ranch could bring challenges at any moment. They worked together with renewed focus, repairing fences, tending livestock, and ensuring that everything was secure. The rancher noticed her growing confidence, her ability to handle tasks independently while still respecting his guidance. It was clear that trust was deepening between them, built on shared effort and mutual respect rather than mere words. By mid-afternoon, the woman approached the rancher with a question. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "Why do you help people like me, even when it's inconvenient?" The rancher paused, considering his response carefully. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "Everyone deserves a chance, a safe place, a little kindness. Life can be hard, but small actions can make a difference. It doesn't take much to offer help, and sometimes that help can change everything." She looked at him thoughtfully, absorbing his words. It was rare for her to encounter someone who acted with such integrity, who offered assistance without expecting anything in return. She realized that his actions were not just about providing shelter. They were about respect, fairness, and a genuine care for others. As the sun began to descend, casting long shadows across the fields, the rancher suggested they finish their tasks for the day and prepare for evening. They worked side by side, moving with efficiency and care, aware that the bond they were forming was not just about necessity, but about shared values and understanding. Later, as they gathered near the barn to check on the livestock, a sudden problem arose. One of the fences had collapsed, and a few animals had wandered too close to the edge of the property. Without hesitation, the rancher moved to secure the animals, and the woman followed, helping with quick, precise actions. The situation required cooperation, focus, and trust. Each relied on the other, and the efficiency of their teamwork highlighted the growing connection between them. Once the animals were safe, they stood together in the fading light, catching their breath. The woman looked at the rancher with a mixture of admiration and respect. "You really know what you're doing," she said, "and thank you for letting me be here." He shook his head slightly. "It's not just me, it's you too. You've handled everything with skill and care. You've proven that you belong here, if only temporarily. That matters." As night fell, they returned to the house, preparing a simple dinner together. The conversation was light, filled with small stories and shared laughter, though the tension of the day still lingered in the background. Both understood that challenges would continue to arise, and that trust must be maintained through consistent actions, not just words. After dinner, the rancher suggested they sit outside for a while. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with stars, and the cool breeze carried the scent of earth and grass. They spoke quietly, discussing plans for the following days, potential repairs, and strategies for maintaining the land. Yet beneath the practical conversation, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of what had happened that day, the challenges they had faced, the support offered, and the bond that was growing stronger. At one point, the woman spoke softly, almost to herself. "I've spent so long doing everything alone," she said. "It's strange to feel like I don't have to do it all by myself." The rancher nodded, understanding completely. "Strength isn't about doing everything alone," he said. "It's about knowing when to accept help and when to offer it. You've shown strength by being here, by trusting, and by working hard. That's real courage." The words hung in the night air, carrying meaning far beyond their simple phrasing. For the woman, it was a recognition of her resilience, her independence, and her willingness to accept support when needed. For the rancher, it was a confirmation that his offer of shelter had been more than a practical act. It had been a moral choice, one that had brought two people together in understanding and respect. As the evening drew to a close, they prepared for bed, the quiet of the ranch settling around them like a protective blanket. The woman lay in the guest room, reflecting on the events of the day. There had been challenges, moments of tension, and reminders of the outside world's judgment. Yet, there had also been trust, understanding, and proof that kindness and integrity could still exist. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that she was not alone, and for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to hope that safety and respect were possible, even in a harsh world. The rancher in his room thought about the day's events as well. Standing up for her had been necessary, but it had also been a reminder that life's simple acts of justice, defending what is right, protecting those who cannot always defend themselves, carry immense value. He knew that challenges would continue to arise, but he also knew that together, they could face them, each bringing their own strengths, skills, and understanding. And so, the night passed quietly, filled with reflection, trust, and the beginnings of a bond that neither had expected but both had silently welcomed. The day had tested their patience, their courage, and their understanding of each other. It had reminded them that the world could be unforgiving, yet moments of compassion and integrity could make a lasting difference. The events of this day would stay with them, shaping their relationship and the path ahead, preparing them for whatever challenges might come next. The rancher rose early, as he always did, and stepped outside to check on the animals. The sun painted the fields in warm golden light, and the air carried a faint, fresh scent of earth and grass. It was peaceful, but both he and the woman knew that peace was fragile, earned through effort, care, and attention. The woman had already been awake for some time, quietly tidying the small guest room and preparing a modest breakfast for herself. Over the past few days, she had grown accustomed to the routines of the ranch, and even though she was still cautious, a sense of comfort had begun to settle in her chest. Being here, under the rancher's roof, had not only provided physical shelter, but also a place where she felt respected and safe, something she had rarely experienced in her life. When the rancher entered the kitchen, he noticed the careful way she moved, the quiet focus she brought to even the simplest tasks. "Morning," he said softly. "Coffee?" she nodded, a small smile on her lips. "Thank you," she replied. It was a brief exchange, but it carried a weight neither of them needed to explain. Over the past days, they had built an unspoken understanding, through work, through conversation, and through the challenges they had faced together. After breakfast, they stepped outside to begin the day's work. Today, the rancher decided to focus on the fields that had suffered the most from recent storms. He explained what needed to be done, and she followed attentively, her hands steady and precise. Together they worked efficiently, repairing fences, moving supplies, and tending to the livestock. There was a rhythm to their actions, a harmony born of shared purpose. As they paused for a brief rest beneath the shade of a large tree, the woman spoke softly. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice thoughtful, "about everything that happened and about being here. I never imagined someone would offer help without expecting something in return." The rancher looked at her, understanding immediately. "Kindness isn't always about expecting something back," he said. "Sometimes it's just the right thing to do. You didn't have to accept it, but you did. That shows courage and trust." She considered his words, letting them settle. It was strange for her to feel so acknowledged, to have her efforts and her choices recognized. She realized that trust and respect were rare commodities, and that the rancher's actions were a demonstration of both. For the first time in a long while, she felt that it was possible to rely on someone without losing herself. The rest of the morning passed with the usual tasks: feeding the animals, checking the fences, and repairing a section of the barn roof that had suffered damage. The work was demanding, but it also brought a sense of accomplishment and connection. The woman's confidence grew with each task, and the rancher noticed the care and attention she put into every action. He also saw the subtle ways in which she began to relax, her movements less tense, her smile appearing more freely. By midday, a storm threatened to roll in from the hills, dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The rancher suggested they finish up and take precautions to protect the animals and the property. Together, they moved quickly, securing gates, reinforcing fences, and ensuring that livestock had shelter. The teamwork was seamless, each understanding the other's intentions without needing extensive explanation. In moments like these, the bond between them strengthened, not through words, but through shared responsibility and trust. When the storm finally broke, heavy rain falling in thick sheets, they retreated to the house. Inside, the warmth from the fireplace contrasted sharply with the cold, wet world outside. The woman dried her hands and set them near the fire, feeling a sense of relief and security. She realized more than ever that the rancher's offer had been more than just a roof. It had been a sanctuary, a place where she could feel safe and cared for without losing her independence. As they shared a simple meal, the conversation turned to the future. "You don't have to stay forever," the rancher said gently, "but I hope you'll consider staying long enough to get back on your feet. There's no rush, no pressure." She looked at him, a quiet determination in her eyes. "I've learned over the years to manage on my own," she said. "But I also know now that accepting help doesn't make me weak. I want to stay, at least for a while. I want to rebuild, to have some stability." The rancher nodded, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. It was rare to meet someone who understood both independence and trust, and he recognized the courage it took for her to accept help and remain true to herself. "Then you're welcome here," he said simply, "as long as you need." The storm passed by late afternoon, leaving the land washed clean and the air filled with the fresh, earthy scent of rain. They stepped outside to survey the fields, taking in the renewed beauty of the ranch. The woman paused, looking out across the wide expanse of land, feeling a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included not only survival, but also comfort, respect, and perhaps even happiness. Over the following days, the routines continued. They worked together, shared meals, and gradually allowed themselves to talk more openly. The woman began to reveal glimpses of her past, not through long stories, but through quiet observations and reflections. The rancher listened without judgment, offering support, guidance, and reassurance when necessary. Their conversations, simple as they were, built a foundation of trust that neither had expected when the offer of shelter had first been made. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the woman turned to the rancher with a thoughtful expression. I didn't think anyone would care enough to help me," she said softly. "And yet, here you are every day showing me that it's possible." He looked at her, seeing the genuine emotion in her eyes. "Sometimes the world is harsh," he said, "but there are always people willing to do what's right, even in small ways. You've already shown strength, courage, and determination. My role is just to give you the space to continue being yourself safely." The woman smiled, a mixture of gratitude and relief. I think I finally understand what it means to accept help without feeling ashamed," she said. "It's not easy, but it feels right." The rancher nodded, understanding completely. "It's a rare feeling, but once you experience it, it can change everything. You don't have to face life alone anymore." Days turned into weeks, and the woman gradually became more confident and self-assured in the rancher's care. She took on responsibilities with skill, demonstrating her capability and independence, yet she also allowed herself to rely on him when needed. The rancher admired her resilience, her intelligence, and her courage. In return, he shared his knowledge, his routines, and his trust, offering guidance without imposing control. One evening, after a long day of work, they stood together on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The land stretched out before them, peaceful and full of potential. The woman turned to the rancher, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I never thought I would feel safe," she said quietly. "Not just physically, but emotionally too. Here, I feel like I can breathe." He smiled, a warmth in his expression that mirrored her own relief. "Safety isn't just about walls and fences," he said. "It's about trust, respect, and knowing that someone has your back. You've earned that every step of the way." The woman looked out across the fields once more, feeling a sense of gratitude that words could barely capture. She had faced hardship, isolation, and uncertainty her whole life, yet here she was, protected, respected, and understood. And though the journey had been difficult, it had led her to a place where she could begin again, with dignity intact. The rancher, watching her quietly, realized that his offer had become more than a temporary gesture. It had become a turning point in both their lives. By offering shelter, he had given her more than safety. He had given her hope, trust, and a chance to rebuild. And in return, he had discovered that helping someone else could enrich his own life, bringing meaning, connection, and fulfillment he had not expected. As night fell, they shared a final quiet moment before retiring for the evening. The stars twinkled overhead, the ranch bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The woman felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she had found a place where she could rest, recover, and grow stronger. The rancher felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that a small act of kindness had made a lasting difference. And so, life on the ranch continued, changed forever by the simple offer of shelter. What began as a moment of compassion had blossomed into trust, respect, and connection, a reminder that even small acts of kindness can ripple outward, shaping lives in ways both subtle and profound. They had faced challenges, learned to trust each other, and discovered that strength and vulnerability could coexist. In the end, the woman no longer feared asking for help, and the rancher found purpose in offering it. Their lives had intersected in a way neither had expected, but both had silently welcomed. And under the wide-open sky, with the land stretching endlessly around them, they knew that together, they could face whatever the future held, stronger, wiser, and connected in a way that would endure far beyond the temporary shelter of a single roof.